I'm Dennis Anderson, along with Julie Zenner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
It's a season of change in Minnesota's political landscape. State Senator Roger Reinert is here to talk about his decision not to run for re-election.
With the Soo Locks closing Friday night, the Great Lakes shipping season is coming to a close. We'll find out what kind of year it was and what work is being done in the port this winter.
And we'll have the week's business headlines and a news file story from 25 years ago.
That's coming up next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. This week's show was recorded on Wednesday afternoon. Now here's Julie with our first guest.
All right, thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. Minnesota lawmakers are getting a late start on the 2016 session due to construction at the state capitol. In fact, lawmakers won't return to St. Paul until early March for official business. Our first guest announced earlier this month that it will be his last session, and joining us now is Senator Roger Reinert, Democrat from Duluth. Welcome back, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
You look so relaxed.
I've heard that.
Some people were very surprised to hear that you were not going to
Sure.
seek re-election. What made you make that decision now?
You know, it was really just kind of a genuine moment in life sort of thing. I'm a big believer that if you pay attention to life, it nudges you in certain directions. And, you know, I had some things happen in 2015 I never could have anticipated just even a couple years ago. Including a promotion in the Navy.
Sure.
Started law school. I'm almost halfway done now, and most importantly, got married. And all those things really made me evaluate my priorities, and it's time for the next chapter of life.
Mm-hmm. You announced pretty early that you weren't going to be seeking.
Yeah, you know, I think that in Duluth, especially on the Democratic side of the fence, you know, primaries matter. So I wanted to get my news out there in time for people to think about it, and hopefully some candidates to come out, which has already happened, and that's good.
Senator, what do you absolutely want to see done in the legislature in this your final year?
You know, in the short session that we mentioned at the opening, the big thing is bonding. You know, we have a number of important bonding projects in Duluth. If you put those projects together, it adds up to about $50 million potentially for investment. You know, when I look at the fourth largest community in the state and what will likely be a bonding bill north of $1 billion, I think that's a pretty reasonable mark for us to set.
We're looking at 2 or 3 different things in the bonding bill. What's the most important, if you could put one right at the top?
Well, the city's #1 project is the Superior Street reconstruction project. I think that's important given the timeliness with the reconstruction project. But I'm really reluctant to rack and stack, as we would say in the Navy, these projects, because I think they're all important to the folks that are bringing them forward. You know, a great example is I'm passionate about the zoo. I think the zoo really never was made whole from the flood of 2012. So if I have a personal #1, it's going to be the zoo.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There's been some talk about really focusing kind of on the bread and butter, you know, not so glamorous projects this year, doing infrastructure, maybe public buildings. Do you see that as being likely rather than the big headlining projects?
Well, I think it will be interesting. I think the Republican House is going to want to start with a very small bill that really is just infrastructure. But obviously they need the governor's support, they need our support in the Senate. You know, and the regional centers in Minneapolis and St. Paul are going to talk about some other projects. So as that bill, I think, gets bigger in order to get enough votes to pass out of the legislature, we'll see more. So I think we'll start with infrastructure and grow out from there.
Will it be a major problem if the downtown steam plant doesn't get its money?
I really think it's problematic given the city's construction process. You know, that project's going to happen over the next couple of years, and if the pipes underneath it aren't done at the same time, you know, you lose a once in 50-year chance to do that. So.
Is there a likelihood with the surplus that some of the infrastructure projects could be done with cash this year instead of
I think
bonding?
very likely. I think one of the things that we'll probably see by the end of session is that maybe a half or 2/3 of the bonding bill will be traditional bonding, and probably the rest will be cash, given the significant surplus the state has.
You've been quite public about the lack of compromise in the legislature, so much rancor. What is it going to take to fix that?
That's a great question. You know, I think that it takes Minnesotans being involved. You know, I think of the state that we grew up in, the Minnesota Miracle, Minnesota, where we put the state first. And it was one of the things I really tried to do with the Purple Caucus that we established in the Senate. You know, our slogan was simple. We're Minnesotans first, and we're other labels second. It didn't discount the other labels, but it said we want to put the state first and come up with really creative and innovative solutions. And Denny, I would point to 2 things from 2015 that really support what your assertion was. We didn't do a tax bill, and we didn't do a transportation bill. And those are sort of 2 fundamental pieces of government in a budget year that did not get done, largely because of political differences. And we need to be better than that. And I think Minnesotans need to ask more from the people running and the people elected.
You bring up a good point. If lawmakers can't reach that point, is it going to depend maybe on the rank and file, the voters of Minnesota, to demand it?
Sure, absolutely. I think you know, what we see on the national stage that I think far too often now is flowing down to the state level is that instead of small p politics being how we work together to figure out how to do things, it's become another form of reality TV. And in that environment, you know, we move to the ends of the spectrum instead of finding the commonalities in the middle that bring us together.
Did you find that people were just not interested in going purple, or were they too afraid to do it publicly?
No, I think, you know, we had 1/3 of the Senate that regularly participated in the caucus, and I think the caucus will continue without me, which I think is a very good thing. The thing that I think was most interesting is the early adopters, if you will, all came out of local government backgrounds where they were nonpartisan and had to work with a variety of political perspectives. So we had mayors and city councilors and school board members who were the first ones to get on board and say, yeah, I know how I can do this, so I can build a relationship with you even if we don't agree on everything. So I think that's just the place that we all have to start.
As you enter your last session of the state legislature, what's been your biggest accomplishment, your greatest accomplishment, or is it the best still to come?
Well, the best is probably not still to come in 2016. I will say I'm very thankful that Congress acted on something, and that was microbeads. They banned microbeads across the country. That would have been my top issue policy-wise this coming session, and thankfully they took that off the table. In answer to your question, Denny, I would look at sort of the promises I made when I ran. You know, the reason I stepped out of the council role into the legislative one was I was very concerned the state had become an unreliable partner. Several years in a row, we set the city budget and then we're unallotted. The state took money back. And at that point, we had no other thing, we couldn't do anything but cut, straight cuts. And that just became really challenging. And I said the state needs to be a better partner to especially our regional centers. So I look back, and I was the chief author 2 years ago of redesigning local government aid. We have funded and increased funding of that. And you know, the state now is a much more reliable partner in all of those ways than it used to be. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of.
Do you think that the time that you spent in the legislature changed how you view politics and the political process?
I think that, you know, I leave 8 years in the legislature knowing 2 things. One is I'm probably not the world's best party person. It's just not really who I am. I'm a civics teacher at heart, and so I have a hard time saying your team is bad and my team is good, and starting from that position. I have a hard time starting with, here's the answer, I'm just going to tell you until you agree with me. I'd rather start with a conversation and see where we come together. And I also know that my job satisfaction comes from seeing things actually tried. And if they don't work, try them again. And that was a lot easier to do at the council, the local level, than it is at the state level. So I think you just see different perspectives and skill sets working at different levels. But at the end of the day, I'm just thankful as I transition out that we have some amazing people transitioning in, and that makes closing this chapter a lot easier.
You mentioned local government aid. Is LGA back where it should be, or do we have a ways to go?
No, actually, we're at the highest point of LGA, at least for the city of Duluth, in some 20 years. So, certainly it will continue to be an issue. I know the Republican House last year wanted to take some major cuts from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth, which I think was, really partisan. And we need to not let that happen. But I think we're in a good position in terms of being a partner again to the city of Duluth.
Mm-hmm. There's been some talk that perhaps a special session this month. Do you think we're running out of time?
I think we're getting really close to the March start of the regular session. So I each day that passes, I think it's a little bit more unlikely that we'll have a special session. In this case, the special session would, we're used to sort of the come for one day, get it done, go home. But with 3 major issues on the table, I don't think that would be the context. So again, the longer or the closer we get to a March start for the regularly scheduled session, I think the less likely a special session
And just
becomes.
talk about those issues a little bit and whether they will be addressed in the upcoming session at all.
Well, I think, the 3 issues that we've been talking about are the driver's license issue, the Real ID issue. The other one is the extension of unemployment benefits for folks affected on the range. And then the third one is the racial disparities. 2 of those have fairly straightforward, I think, answers. But, the racial disparities one we really need to grapple with. And I think it actually is an injustice to say we're somehow going to show up and in a day or 2 find an answer to that. That is something that a regular session where you can have hearings and conversations and let that evolve over a month or 2 or 3 is what that issue merits.
So you see that being pushed off until next year, perhaps?
No, I think we'll get working on it this year. I just don't think it's going to be a special session. And I think the governor has some tools on the unemployment issue, and I think we're holding committee meetings, so I think we're coming to some resolution, and we now know that the driver's license issue doesn't become super important till 2018. So I think the stars are aligning more for just dealing with these issues when we're scheduled to meet.
Eric Simonson and Charlotte Gardner have both indicated they would like to have the chair that you now hold, or the seat you hold in the state senate. Will you be endorsing one of them?
Well, I don't intend to anytime soon. Again, I'm a civics teacher at heart, and certainly by November, I, as a citizen who lives in Duluth, will have somebody that I'm supporting. But I think that we are blessed to live in a community where people are engaged and pay attention. And it's not my job to be kingmaker, and it's not my seat. Belongs to the people of Duluth, and it's their job to decide who they want to represent them next. And by no means have we seen, I think, everybody who is going to step forward. So.
Of course, Duluth has a new mayor now with Emily Larson, and for a while, a lot of people were thinking that you were going to throw your hat in the ring for that. Any regrets?
Not at all.
No. The election's
over? I attended the inauguration and I had the good fortune to sit in the front row and just sat there and thought, this is who is supposed to be here at this time. I'm so confident in her having the right skill set to be the next person after Mayor Ness. So I'm really going to enjoy working with her in this last year. And it just makes it, as I said, it makes me feel good about my decision to transition out, knowing the people that are stepping forward, including Mayor Larson, who's just going to do a fabulous job.
So is this the last of you as far as public life?
Sure.
Or?
I don't know, and I don't think so. I've said not now doesn't mean not ever. But I do think that if something I enjoy it, and I hope that I've been halfway effective at it over the years. So, if another opportunity comes along, it's not something I would discount, but I think it would be closer to home and it would be nonpartisan.
You've mentioned a couple of times in the conversation that you teach civics. What do you tell your students who might be considering a run at public office at some point?
Well, I think first of all, I try to instill in them the idea that we are all citizens, and small d democracy requires us to be active as citizens, and that doesn't require you being in an elected role. And I really try to get away from this idea that it's a consumer relationship, that you get to park your problem at my door and somehow I will solve it and I will then give you the solution and the transaction is done. We work together, and I have a role, but you have an equally important one as a citizen. One of the things I have them do is go interview elected officials, and they come away with the sense that they're me. I mean, they're no different than I am. And so some are inspired, I think, then to go down that road, but others, I think, are just less intimidated in reaching out when they need to work on an issue.
All the best as you enter your last session.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
What did that sign say?
The sign on the Black Steer's door says closed, and it reflects the complaints of many downtown bar owners that they're being hit with a double whammy from the recent sin tax increase on liquor and tougher drunk driving enforcement, including sobriety checkpoints.
Because if they stay and have one or two, they're afraid on the way home that they might be stopped, more so than on normal nights. Or I know on our hockey nights we used to get a lot of people in here after the game, and we don't anymore. And that's the answers they give me.
Debbie Eider owns and manages the main lounge. She says she's experiencing some of the same problems that closed the Black Steer. She also points to a lackluster nightlife in Duluth with no entertainment like movie theaters or playhouses to draw people downtown at night.
Hopefully 91 will be good.
The last year and a half haven't been the best for the former owners of Murphy's Lounge and R.T. Quinlan's. Both have changed hands. But the president of the Greater Downtown Council says it's the simple law of capitalism.
Competition is what makes the system work, and when a person goes into business, certainly you have to be aware of your competition. You have to be willing to carve out your niche in the marketplace. And some make it, some don't.
Well, Twin Port ship watchers are going through withdrawal as the 2015 shipping season comes to a close this very week, with the Soo locks closing Friday night by midnight. Now, boat watchers will have to learn to live without their daily shipping fix, but the end of the shipping season doesn't mean the port is going to be a quiet place. A number of ships will be on winter layup here in the Twin Ports, with lots of off-season maintenance work scheduled. Joining us with more is Adele Yorde. She's the Public Relations Director for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. Welcome, Adele. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Well, it was kind of a tough year for the shipping industry, especially with the downturn in the mining industry. How would you rank this 2015 year?
This was a slow year. We haven't ranked it in numeric order, the stacking.
But far fewer ships.
Far fewer ships, about 140 fewer ships than usual. Visits this year. It was the lowest iron ore tonnage since 2009. So that puts that in perspective a little bit, and we all knew what happened in 2008. So the rest of the commodities, held their own a little bit. Obviously, limestone is off because it's used in pellet production. But we saw salt coming in anticipation of a really icy year again. Grain was up. That was a nice uptick since 2014. Sure. And we saw an awful lot of cargo moving across the Kluwer Public Marine Terminal, the project cargo, the heavy lift components that came in this year. So there were some good perks. Coal held its own for another year. So we'll end up somewhere over 32 million this year, and when our average is 38 million, that kind of puts it in perspective.
So what's the impact on day-to-day life down at the port when you have a slowdown like you did in the iron mining industry?
Well, some of the docks did lay off workers. I know it was one of the ore docks had to let go some workers early because there were ships that were laying up early. Some of the Lakers laid up much earlier than anticipated this year, shifting some of that cargo up to 2 harbors to load out there. So that was a slowdown. By the same token, the Herbert C. Jackson came in much earlier in early December, so they started at Fraser Shipyards hiring workers to get to work on those major repowering projects on that vessel.
And that sounds like a really exciting project. Tell us what you know about that.
It is. The Jackson's part of the Interlake fleet, and they're taking one of the old steamers and they're pulling the old engines out and they're putting brand new diesel engines in, capable of sometime being able to burn low sulfur fuels when those become available on the lake. So they are really retrofitting the entire engine room in that vessel.
Adele, how many Lakers will be spending the winter here, and will all of them have maintenance work?
There'll be 7 Lakers in. All will have some amount of repair and maintenance work, some that's left over from last season in terms of welding that needs to be done on some of those sides of those vessels. They got really hammered with ice. Other routine maintenance, just like you and I bring our cars in and we need our oil changed, our timing belts checked, all of the components in those vessels will be worked on.
And certainly even that is good for the local economy.
It is, it is. People talk about this being a 10-month shipping season for the Great Lakes, but actually I tend to look at this as a port community that has a 12-month shipping industry, because there are hundreds more workers now, electricians and mechanics and boilermakers and pipe fitters that are all going to work on those vessels. I've heard Fraser's doing 2 shifts a day. So they're really putting in that energy to get that one out, and the other 6 that will be in port.
So this is a pretty big deal for Fraser getting this work, and then also for the port itself.
It's a huge chunk. I think Lake Carriers recently put out a news release that talked about $110 million being invested in ship repairs, maintenance, and major projects like these on the Great Lakes. So for one of those major projects to be here in the Twin Ports was a real coup for Fraser.
We talked about the fact that 2015 wasn't a tremendous year. Projecting ahead 2016, kind of in the same boat?
It would be, I would hope that by second, third quarter we'd start to see a little bit of an uptick. A lot will depend on what kinds of sanctions get implemented in terms of foreign steel coming into the market. If we can start getting production levels back and getting some of those workers on the range back to work, then we'll have more pellets to ship. So that would really be the major throughput that we'd be talking about for tonnage numbers. We look to have a strong year, project cargo again this coming year, so that bodes well. And then grain should stay, because most of those ships going back to the Mediterranean area are taking grain back, so it's a nice backhaul.
Did they also bring commodities here when they came from overseas?
Yes, they all of those, the vessels that came in primarily came from Middle East. We had some from Korea, we had some from Greece. They brought everything in from steel pipe.
What did they bring us?
We had steel pipe, we had pressure vessels that went to the oil extraction business up in Edmonton. We had transformers and electrical generators that went out west. So we sit at this crossroads of road and rail. So they may come in by water, but they have strong interconnects with major rail and roadways.
How big a deal is the wind energy cargo these days?
It was huge. It was huge. Of the 24 ships we saw, 12 of those carried wind turbine equipment this year, and 7 of those were for Elite Clean Energies project in North Dakota. So we handle in the port of Duluth more than half of the wind cargo on the entire Great Lakes Seaway system. So because of our strategic location in the Midwest and those 4 Class 1 railway access and all of the road transport that we offer, it makes us a great multimodal hub here.
Adele, are we starting to see more women in the shipping industry?
We are, little by little. There are a couple of port directors, in fact, on the West Coast who are females. But whether it's male or female, we're seeing more young people show an interest, which is really a great thing for this community. Years ago, there were a lot more people involved with hands-on, and then everything technically got a lot more mechanized in loading and unloading. So some of those connections where family had a brother or a son or an uncle that worked in the field, now it's telling that story again to let them know that right in their backyard they can get a transportation and logistics management, either bachelor's or master's degree right at UWS. We've got a young graduate from East High School, went to the Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City, Michigan. And the work that's going on this winter needs to remind all those kids that if they don't think 4 years of college might be in their future, the trades are in dire need. We're all graying. Self-included.
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at you, but I'm self-included. There's a graying of that industry like there are a lot of others. And there are an awful lot of opportunities for young men and women on the lakes and shoreside to really help direct traffic.
How far did the Duluth Intermodal project get this year?
We got to the point where we're almost done with the sheet piling on the D side. All of the piles have been driven and everything's in place to pour concrete in the spring. For the Ro-Ro dock, the new roll-on, roll-off dock. Ironically, the lake levels are up this month. And so we were hoping to get that poured this fall, but we need to wait for some evaporation to happen to get back down. And then in the spring, they'll hit it again hard so we can by summer be resurfacing that.
Any return of passenger ship service in the near future?
Boy, we're working on it. We work with the Great Lakes Cruising Coalition, and there have been return of passenger ships more to other ports in the Great Lakes. Some of them are a little bit small. They're like 100 passenger, and we hear a little bit of I don't know about crossing Lake Superior. So a little trepidation on that part, but we've worked out a lot of projects with the Customs and Border Protection, so we've got an easier, more streamlined way of clearing those passengers. So I hope soon, maybe not in 2016, but we'll look for 17.
Speaking of clearing, the Cornelia, a lot of people watched it for a couple of months this November and December. Any update on what happened, or?
I have not heard a peep, which isn't unusual because what they were able to get was a security agreement, so a bond of some kind that allowed the ship to depart while the investigation wrapped up. So as soon as I know something, I will let you know, but as far as I know, they were happy to depart.
Thanks, Adele. Adele Yorde, Duluth Port Authority. Thank you.
Time now for a look at the week's first business headlines for 2016. The struggling Kmart chain is closing stores in Superior, Virginia, and Ironwood as it continues to shrink nationwide, along with Sears, its parent company. It's an especially difficult decision for Superior, where Target previously announced its store would be closing late in January. Both losses will occur on the busy Tower Avenue retail corridor. Kmart has been closing stores nationwide for several years. The big box retailer closed its Duluth Heights store late in 2011 and its Grand Rapids store 1 year ago.
St. Luke's has unveiled a $4 million investment in its Duluth healthcare facilities. The improvements include a new post-anesthesia unit and renovations to sterile processing systems. The new facility can accommodate 14 patients, 5 more than the older recovery room. The larger space is needed because St. Luke's has added new operating rooms in its new Building A just east of the main hospital. The new cleaning process for surgical instruments is entirely automated to improve disinfection.
Well, as mentioned earlier in the program, iron ore cargoes on the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway declined by 8.5% last year versus 2014. The volume shipped from Duluth's Canadian National Dock suffered the largest decline, dropping 39% last year. The decline reflects production cutbacks on the Iron Range, where mines and processing plants currently are closed in Silver Bay, Keewatin, Beauvais, Eveleth, Forbes, and Hoyt Lakes. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Well, if you have a comment on our show, call now. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to almanacnorth@wdsc.org. And the WDSC website is a great resource for program updates, news about the station, and information about becoming a financial supporter of public television. And Julie, I understand you're going to be off next week, so Pamela Fish will be here in your place.
That's right. Pam is always good to be here as a fill-in, and take care of her.
I will take care of her. All right. Thank you. For Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody, and be kind.